Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, May 15th, 2025. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Greg Grandin, Pulitzer Prize-winning author, joining us to talk about his new book, America, America, A New History of the New World. And later in the show, Brian Merchant of the Blood in the Machine newsletter will join us to talk about the AI job crisis and how it's already here. Also on the program, on the 77th anniversary of the ongoing Nakba, Israel escalates its bombing of Gaza for the second straight day, and Trump once again floats U.S. control of the Strip as a freedom zone. Rashida Tlaib introduces a resolution to formally recognize the Nakba, and AOC signs on. That's good. Zoran endorsement when as well. Trump wraps up his Middle East tour in the UAE after saying that he's lifting sanctions on Syria, which is a good thing, but apparently he didn't tell his own State Department. I'm off the cuff. Trump also announced major weapons deals with Qatar, which I'm sure Israel's not too happy about. But they are probably happy to hear about how Trump's sanctions on the ICC are working. The International Criminal Court is reportedly completely blocked up because of the sanctions, because they decided to hold Netanyahu accountable. American bioweapon J.D. Vance wants to meet with the new Pope. Wear gloves, Leo. The Supreme Court has
been a Catholic, 4 months, wants to meet with 2 popes.
It's just a little suspicious. The Supreme Court is hearing arguments this morning over Trump's attempt to overturn the constitutionally protected birthright citizenship that we all have. A nonpartisan congressional body finds the GOP tax cuts for the rich would add $2.5 trillion to the deficit. The DOJ is investigating United Healthcare for potential Medicare fraud. Where was Doge on that, huh? That's good, though. The National Weather Service is so crippled by Doge, speaking of them, that it may not be able to provide real-time updates ahead of hurricane season. One of the South African white refugees Trump accepted into the country once posted, "Jews are dangerous." Mahmoud Khalil, still locked up for supposed anti-Semitism by this administration. It's a lie, obviously. And lastly, poor Mike Lawler. Trump has weighed in on the New York governor's race, and he wants Elise Stefanik. All this and more on today's Majority Report, or as I should say, the M-Majority Report. Hello to Russ. Hello to Matt. We have a great show. I'm so excited to talk to Greg Grandin and also Brian Merchant, who both are wonderful authors. But let's start here. So yesterday, there were hearings with the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee and also the House Appropriations Committee. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Health and Human Services was the subject. These were hearings about the HHS budget and the layoffs of employees that have affected Health and Human Services' ability to look after the health of the American public. They had some disastrous decisions, laying off folks that were supposed to be inspecting or tracking bird flu and then having to hire them back because of the crisis.
It's surveillance. We don't want surveillance on flus.
They're also cutting in the House bill food safety inspections. I thought this was about making America healthy again.
That means a different oil at the burger for the burgers in the fast food place.
Yeah, and we'll play this clip of Bernie Sanders questioning RFK Jr., which I think really shows the contrast in a left-wing versus a libertarian perspective on health, which is basically what RFK Jr. embodies at this point. Yeah. And much like
a rich person that doesn't want to pay for your cancer treatments perspective.
And much like libertarians on war, for example, or on the military-industrial complex, sometimes we can find a little bit of alignment, but overall, the visions are entirely different. One is a humanist vision, and one is at least in the context of foreign policy, isolationist, sometimes eugenicist. Yeah, we may agree that we don't want to be in Afghanistan or something like that, or we shouldn't send bombs to Israel. But if there's going to be a fork in the road after we come to that initial agreement. And I view this Bobby Kennedy stuff in a very similar vein. Here is Ben Cohen, the co-founder of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. They sold, and I think they're a little upset right now with the business practices of the company they sold it to, but that's an aside for right now.
Unilever, the same place that bought Joe Rogan's company.
Interesting. Here he is actually participating in protests against RFK Jr. and these cuts and tying it in with Gaza. And then you'll see him being interviewed by somebody as he leaves or is kicked out of the hearing.
Permitted while the committee conducts its business. Capitol Police are asked to remove the individuals from the hearing room.
Move down the hallway.
Ben, why are you getting arrested?
Move down the hallway. If you stop, you will be arrested.
Poor kids in Gaza by buying bombs and pays for it by kicking kids off Medicaid in the U.S.
Keep going down. Keep going down the hallway.
Ben, how many days have they been starving in Gaza?
What has it been? 75 days by now.
Stop.
Anthony, I need my shoe.
It's our program. Down the hall right now. Let's go. Everybody. Everybody. Stop business. Stop business. Pick it up.
Ben, what are you calling for the Congress and senators to do for Gaza?
Congress and the senators need to ease the siege. They need to let food into Gaza. They need to let food to starving kids.
What did you say in there, Ray?
I said that Congress is paying to bomb poor kids in Gaza and paying for it by kicking poor kids off Medicaid in the U.S.
Don't let them any closer. Back. Stop.
Don't let them any closer. Don't let them hear the truth.
What a clear message.
Yep.
And it comes from an ice cream guy. Mm-hmm. It'd be nice if someone like Hakeem Jeffries could point out such a clear line, but he's bought off, so he can't make that direct comparison.
Exactly. And that's part of why, sometimes I've spoken about the deficit myth, and I really am an admirer of Stephanie Kelton, and her work is factually correct. But from a as a political matter, I don't necessarily think that we need to emphasize that, because this is just an age-old adage, I guess it's not age-old, but Tupac said it. They've got money for wars, but they can't feed the poor. I'm paraphrasing a little bit.
Guns are butter.
Yeah, and that's Jeet here had a great piece, I think, about that. It must have been a few months ago, employing that, because I do think people don't, you can tap into people's experience of where are my tax dollars going towards, and if you make people connected to where their tax dollars are going, then you can have a more engaged citizenry where they're more involved in the idea that wait, hey, why is Trump proposing adding to the military budget with like this historic increase to put us at World War II levels when we're not at that level of warfare. Why are we cutting healthcare for nearly 80 million Americans?
There are choices being made.
Right. Because I think Americans can understand the concept of a budget and how we allocate our resources. And creating that contrast has real political salience. I think it's a huge reason why so many people stayed home in 2024 is because they saw on their phones what their tax dollars were going towards. And it is this starving baby or this teenage boy who lost both of his limbs.
Bombs dropped on tents. It's obscene.
And that is what the tangible results of what government is doing look like to people. But when you can say, why don't we reorient ourselves towards giving people health care with those funds, that's when you begin to speak to people where they are. And this clip by Bernie Sanders is such a contrast here of that vision.
Just one note on this
Sure.
protest here. Jason Rosenberg points out, huge shout out to the veteran AIDS activist that disrupted this hearing as well. RFK Jr. is an AIDS denialist who just last month gutted the CDC's Division of HIV Prevention and eliminated the entire workforce at the Office of Infectious Diseases and HIV AIDS policy. I mean, that's just another just obscenely grotesque element of RFK's just despicable legacy, frankly.
Yeah. And here is Bernie Sanders laying out the different visions of healthcare and what we can use our resources for in comparison to Bobby Kennedy.
68,000 people a year die because they don't get to a doctor when they should. Is healthcare a human right? Will you work with us to guarantee healthcare to every man, woman, and child in America?
Well, I think you're asking two different questions. You're asking a philosophical question about whether it is a human right, like a constitutional right. As an attorney, I would say that it's not a right of a kind that we otherwise enshrine in the Constitution, because healthcare costs your neighbor money.
Can you pause? Healthcare.
Get your hand out of my pocket. The money I've inherited.
Healthcare costs your neighbor money. Now we're back.
Ben Shapiro.
Yep, this is libertarianism. But yeah, Bernie didn't ask if it was a civil right. Bernie didn't ask if it was a civil right. He asked if it was a human right, which is a very different thing. Go back a little bit. Just want to
also
point out that sleight of hand.
Let's pretend like everyone wants to get so philosophical. No, this is a policy question. Should healthcare be guaranteed by our government or not? We don't need to think about what was in Thomas Jefferson's head about this.
Yeah.
Man, woman, and child in America.
Well, I think you're asking two different questions. You're asking a philosophical question about whether it is a human right, like a constitutional right. As an attorney, I would say that it's not a right of a kind that we otherwise enshrine in the Constitution, because healthcare costs your neighbor money. If I smoke cigarettes for 20 years, I make that choice, which is my choice.
I don't mean to, I don't have a lot of time, so I just.
Thank you.
But I am here.
If you ask if you're asking me a philosophical question,
No.
I gotta, give you a thoughtful answer.
Within 30 seconds.
Yeah.
It's a problem.
So, it's not like freedom of speech, which costs, everybody.
But every other country, Mr. Secretary.
I would just Google what RFK's freedom of speech costs, say, people in American Samoa and how he runs away from that, but I'll just let it play.
Oh, it's not like freedom of speech, which costs, everybody.
But every other country, Mr. Secretary, every other country guarantees health care to all people as a right. Should we, as Americans?
The objective is to get Americans the level of health care that they want, the choice, which Americans want.
What?
They don't want the choice to be uninsured.
Well, but
they don't want the choice to die because they don't get to a doctor on time.
Americans prefer private insurance to other insurance sources.
Yeah.
We know what this guy is. Come on, folks.
He's lying at the end there. That's actually not true. Medicare and Social Security, well, Medicare is extremely, extremely popular. And if he wants to talk about how there's scarce resources. I don't agree with that. We now have wealth concentration at the very top that could be clawed back to fund healthcare for even people that Bobby Kennedy would deem as takers of everybody else's healthcare, like if you smoke cigarettes your whole life, or like, if you're like Bobby Kennedy and you engage in recreational drug use, like of heroin and things like that. I guess he would think, if he wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth,
taking vacations all the time,
right, that would preclude him from getting healthcare in the future, because he didn't take care of his body when he was young. How dare he ask for healthcare later on in his life?
What is to give people a level of healthcare that they'd like?
But if we're talking about what is the most efficient way, if you're saying there's a limited number of resources and that human rights, freedom of speech, that doesn't affect your neighbor. I don't know if that's necessarily true. Perhaps later we'll talk about how Joe Rogan thinks that Kanye's extremely anti-Semitic song should be allowed to go everywhere. But Medicare spends up to 7 times less than private insurers on administrative costs. It is a more efficient system by definition. 1, because it's not profit motivated. 2, because there is nobody in between you and Medicare. Private insurers act like middlemen. They act like the mafia, where they take a cut because they are the gatekeepers between you and your healthcare. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. And what Bernie Sanders is showing there is the hollowness of the Make America Healthy Again mantra as a political movement, whatever that means, is because Kennedy says it right there. Well, it shouldn't be a human right, because if you make the wrong choices, if you had an addiction to cigarettes or you ate the wrong food, according to that freak, hey, you're shit out of luck.
It's a health movement for wealthy people that, I mean, the way he says it costs your neighbor money is exactly, that's everything. That's all that matters to these people. They don't want everyone to be healthy because they want people to live fulfilled lives. They want people to be healthy because they think it'll lower their taxes. And it's really gross.
And to see him say this as a Kennedy too, like, given how LBJ presided over the passage of Medicare, and that was a part of his uncle's legacy too. And given how his father ran his campaign and became more radicalized and was more closely associated with labor unions later in his life, I mean, I don't know. It's such a bastardization of that memory, but that's for him to live with, I guess. And his siblings have said similar things to me. With that said, we're going to be speaking to Greg Grandin in just a second, but first, a word from some of our sponsors. Have you searched for something embarrassing on the internet? I know I have. Maybe you've used incognito mode on your browser, but did you know that incognito mode in and of itself is not enough to hide your browsing history? You got to check the fine print on these things. All of your online activity is still 100% visible to third parties unless you use ExpressVPN. Thank you to ExpressVPN for supporting the Majority Report, and we have an offer for you. Visit expressvpn.com/majority, and you can get an extra 4 months free. Without ExpressVPN, these third parties can still see every website that you visit, even when you're in incognito mode. And you got to know by now, don't trust these big tech people. It's been coming out in these antitrust suits, how duplicitous they can be. Your internet service provider, your mobile network provider, the admins of your Wi-Fi network, they can see the websites that you visit. But ExpressVPN reroutes 100% of your traffic and hides your IP address through secure encrypted servers, so third parties cannot see your browsing history. It works on all devices, phones, laptops, tablets, and more. Just one button you gotta tap, you turn it on, and then you're protected. It is that easy. ExpressVPN is a must for me when I was just traveling over the weekend. Your airport Wi-Fi, if you got to go to do some work at a coffee shop like I like to do on occasion, always flipping on ExpressVPN to make sure that I'm private and protected. Protect your online privacy today by visiting expressvpn.com/majority. That's expressvpn.com/majority, and you can get an extra 4 months free. expressvpn.com/majority. And lastly, Manakora honey is just It's essential. I use it. Just take a spoonful when I have a sweet tooth, especially because I'm trying to eat healthier right now. But I've also used it off-label for things like zits. I get the occasional cold sore. I hate admitting this, but that's the truth. And Manacora honey, off-label, but it's a part of my routine, and it's one of the only things that helps in those instances. It's something simple and delicious to add to your wellness routine. It's rich, creamy, and has the most delicious honey that you've ever had. Manacora honey is ethically produced by Manacora's master beekeepers in remote forests of New Zealand. Manacora honey contains powerful nutrients to support immunity and gut health, and the bees collect the nectar from the manuka trees in New Zealand. The nectar is then packed with bioactives, and the honey that is produced has 3 times as more antioxidants and prebiotics than your average honey. A special antibacterial compound called MGO also comes from the nectar of the tea tree. Manacora third-party tests every single harvest for MGO and makes these results available through their QR system. It is a game changer. All you need is 1 heaped teaspoon every morning to get the most out of the amazing bioactives in Manuka. Additional usage throughout the day is completely fine, especially helping to cut out other sweeteners. Those chemically sweeteners. You don't need that anymore. You got Manacora honey. Thanks to Manacora for supporting the Majority Report. Now it's easier than ever to try Manacora honey. Head to manacora.com/majority to get $25 off the starter kit, which comes with an MGO 850 plus Manuka honey jar, 5 honey travel sticks, a wooden spoon, and a guidebook. That's manukora.com/majority for $25 off your starter kit. Thanks, Manacora. You can get your $25 off by going your starter kit by going to manacora.com/majority. All right, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Greg Grandin. We are back, and I'm thrilled to be joined now by Greg Grandin, professor of history at Yale and a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. His new book, America, America, A New History of the New World, is out now. Greg, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. And, you know, I heard you've been making the rounds on this awesome book. People really should check it out. You were on Chapo. I listened to that a little bit. And I heard you responding to, well, I guess it hadn't happened yet, but the new Pope being selected. And now we know, do we have that tweet from Gustavo Petro? So I think this is a pretty good entryway into our conversation and to what the theme of your book is. And here is Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia, responding to this tweet that said that Robert Prevost becomes the first American Pope. This is the guy from Chicago. And Petro responds, the first American Pope is Francisco I, meaning Pope Francis, who just passed away, who was from Argentina. And is this not so emblematic of what you've written about, how U.S. and North American centric the branding of America is?
I mean, the title of the book is America, America, and sometimes hosts have trouble saying that second word.
I have trouble speaking any other language, so forgive me.
You know, and yes, of course, because Latin Americans understand themselves as American, and the United States was United States of America. And this, you know, the politicization of the name is a theme of the book. It's not the only theme of the book. There's larger arguments related to Latin America's role in the creation of kind of political and legal modernism, but yes, the competition over who gets to claim the name America and the kind of provincialism of the United States to think of itself as America, as only America is is always constantly on display. The Gulf of America. I mean, put an accent on it, and it's the Gulf of America. And aside from, nobody would have a problem with it in Latin America. So yes, Francis was the first American Pope because Argentina is in America, and Pope Bob or Leo is the second American Pope. But it's even more interesting. I mean, his maternal grandfather. I mean, it's so vague and ambiguous. It is profoundly anti-MAGA. His maternal grandfather was either from the Dominican Republic, Haiti, or Louisiana. It's unclear. There's documents indicating that he was born in one of those three places. So the Greater Caribbean, and of course, Dominican Republic and Haiti is the island of Hispaniola, and that's where the conquest started in many ways. So the history is very deep.
And just the history of conquest, you do begin your book speaking about the conquest of the Americas, and I want to get to that. But from an overarching view, the U.S. centrism really just feels like capitalism, to be overly simplistic about it, but it's like that's where the center of capitalism is, and so that must be where the center of the world is, and there you go.
Well, that's true. I mean, there is no country this in many ways speaks to my previous book, The End of the Myth, and the United States and the centrality of expansion. The United States is like capitalism. It has to expand or it dies. And as soon as limits are placed on it, it turns inward and on itself. And I think that that's what's happening with the current polarization and deepening crisis that we're in. But yeah, no other polity in world history and has the political dynamics so overlaid the economic dynamics of capitalism so neatly. So yes, America is America, but all the New World is America in the sense that the United States capitalism, the United States has relied on, has expanded into Latin America, the first overseas kind of. Mexico was the first nation building project after the Civil War. We turned Mexico into a major exporter of raw material integrated into the U.S. economy. So the heartland of the West, of the frontier, isn't just within the boundaries of the United States. It spills into Mexico, and that's why the relationship with Mexico is so fraught and so fascinating.
And so that's, I think, a good opportunity to move back to when this all began, to when conquest and colonization of the Americas began. And there's this really rich dichotomy you explore between Latin American humanism and the dehumanization that was involved in the conquest of the Americas. Can you draw on that, and we can even just more broadly talk about the history, how many were killed in the conquest of the Americas by the English and the Spanish, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, first it was the Spanish, right? Yeah. The Spanish conquered the New World, first the Caribbean, then Mexico, and then the Andes, and then spreading outward in the early 1500s after Columbus, obviously in 1492. And the devastation is kind of incomprehensible. Demographers imagine that was somewhere between 90 and 100 million people living in the New World in the 1490s and the early 1500s. Within the century, 90% were gone. And they were gone, at first it was conquistador violence, and the cruelty of the violence, was just beyond also comprehension. The punishment, the maiming, the mutilation, the killing of children, the roasting of children, feeding them to Spanish dogs so they would have the taste of flesh, the enslavement of Native Americans so that they would extract gold and then silver and dive for pearls and then eventually tend to the fields. That was the first wave of demographic collapse. And then in the subsequent generations and decades, it was the diseases, European diseases, that would ravage Mexico or the Peruvian highlands. millions, 1 million people at a time, 1 million people here. So that by the time you got to 1600, 90% of those 90 million people were gone. It was just what demographers call it the greatest human mortality rate, mortality event in history. And what I do, and just to build on it, your point about humanization and dehumanization, that's exactly right. That's the tension of the book, because the Spanish conquest, for all of its brutality, was carried out by and legitimated by the Catholic Church, which pretended or understood itself to be universal, to be the bearer of universal history and the bearer of universal wisdom. And it had to justify itself. And of course, there were more than enough priests willing to justify what was going on. But there was a small minority that dissented. And the dissent was incredibly powerful. Within a couple of years, there was laying the foundation for what we think of as political modernism. There was critiques of the legitimacy and legality of the conquest. There was critiques insistence that Native Americans were not subhuman, that all human beings descended from a single lineage. They were all equal of the same community. There was an argument that narrowed the terms, the criteria by which war could be considered just almost to a sliver. Now, these were inconsequential in the short run, right? They didn't stop the suffering, but they were consequential in the sense that they built a kind of legacy of political legalism that gets taken up at different times. The British try to find a worker. They want to both dismiss the Spanish conquest as illegal and find justification for their own own settlement, own settler colonialism, which begins in 1600s. And what happens there, of course, is they land in a place that's already devastated by the disease, right? They land in a place that they get there and they're like, oh, look, where is everybody? Everybody's gone. Everybody, because the plagues and diseases had already wiped out much of the North American coastal population. So the British could presume that, they were discovering empty land or empty enough land. And that tension between a Spanish empire that agonized and grappled and debated over the nature of the humanity of Native Americans and debated over the legality of the conquest, and the British, who were just sure that they were happy-go-lucky and they were just positive that everything they did was justified. That tension runs through the book and runs through the wars of independence, and then Latin American countries in their attempts to contain and control an expanding United States. So that's one of the tensions of the book.
So it wasn't just the tension between a Catholic conquest vision and a Protestant Protestantism. It's also that the Spanish, they're the people in the group project that did all the work, and then not to compare genocide to a homework assignment, but
it's a great question. It wasn't just that there was an ideological difference between Catholicism and Protestantism. It was the social history in which those two empires and colonial states proceeded. Spain, having conquered an enormous mass of people presiding over a land of enormous resources, used those people to extract the wealth. They were the center of things. They were, Native Americans and then African Americans were the center of the Spanish Empire, both materially in the sense that they extracted the wealth, but also morally, because these debates went on about, what they were the center of these moral debates. The British colonial project was more of a settler colonial project in the sense that they didn't, there was the fur trade, and, I don't want to downplay how much labor Indians gave to white settlers. They gave plenty. They saved them plenty of times on those Thanksgivings. But for the most part, they pushed Native Americans to the frontier. And the settler project was one of evasion and denial of what
ethnic cleansing versus active genocide, if you want to put it in modern terms, perhaps.
It makes a difference whether your colonial genocide takes place at the beginning of the colonial project, like it does in Spain, or if it takes place over the course of 300 years, like it does with the British. and doesn't and the U.S. doesn't end until the late 19th century when the pacification of the West. Like that makes a difference, and that led to its kind of the racial sharpness of the United States. The United States was forged in conquest. When the United States was created, its founders revitalized the doctrine of conquest and said it was legitimate. When Latin America was created, its founders looked back on that earlier critique of Spain, and they delegitimized. They said the doctrine of conquest was no longer valid. And the reason they did that is because there were 7 independent republics on a crowded continent that had to learn how to live with each other. They came into being already a League of Nations, already a United Nations. The United States came into being believing itself the only republic, the only peoples on an empty enough continent where they could just move west. And in moving west, law professors in the United States taught the doctrine of conquest as a legitimate principle of international law well into the 20th century. Latin Americans began to repudiate the doctrine of conquest almost immediately, and respecting each other's boundaries and respecting the sovereignty. And that tension, and then of course Latin America applies that critique to the United States in order to try to contain the United States, ultimately becomes what we call international law. What gets put into place after World War II, to put it as crudely and simply and quickly terms as possible, the liberal international order, the rules-based order, was pretty much all in place. All of the principles of that order existed in Spanish America in the 1830s and 1840s. And that was the model, and that was then globalized, and which is now, of course, being taken apart.
Yeah, and so that contrast and hundreds of years flatten, right, when we're looking at it from a history textbook. But if we're looking, your analysis lays bare how in 19th century North America, manifest destiny, that's a driving force. But hundreds of years prior, there was an intellectual and moral debate among the Spaniards, and even, I guess this is a good opportunity to talk about Father Bartolome de las Casas.
Yeah.
Hey, all right, I'm almost there. Because so that central figure, right, is a way that you can, I think, analyze that contrast. Can you explain his legacy and his human rights writings?
He came over as a Spanish settler. His father sailed with Columbus. He imagined himself as he was already a priest, and there was no necessarily a contradiction between being a priest and a settler, and a merchant and a conqueror. And there's evidence that he participated in a number of pacifications of indigenous communities early on. He arrived in 1503. Within 10 years, he had basically done a 180-degree turnaround in his moral worldview, and he came to see the conquest as illegitimate. He came to see that Native Americans were not natural slaves, a concept that the Spanish Christians borrowed from Aristotle to claim that Indians were, could be enslaved. He came up with this expression that all humanity is one, or all humanity comes from the same lineage, meaning there was no difference from Native Americans and Europeans. And in some ways, it's the foundation of our concept of humanity, the slow creation of humanity. An idea that all human beings are one. It's a fragile idea. It's never applied, perfectly, obviously, but it is a kind of foundation of political modern thought. And De las Casas was one of the first person to come up with it. And he wrote a book. He wrote thousands and thousands of pages in Latin and Spanish. But there was a brief excerpt that was published in Spain. Spain, because of the printing press, was one of the first empires to actively publicize its atrocities. I mean, today we have TikTok. We see what Israel's doing through TikTok and Twitter,
right.
and Facebook, a different communications revolution, but Spain had the printing press. And there were many reasons why it printed, these very graphic descriptions, and not necessarily being critical of themselves, but Las Casas was. And Las Casas really presides over this moral revolution. He's not the only one. There's other, there's Francisco Vitoria and there's Antonio Montesinos. There's a lot of them are Dominicans. There's also Franciscans. Later on, there's Jesuits. They were all associated with what's known as the Salamanca School, based on the University of Salamanca. And out of that school comes a number of arguments that we've already kind of rehearsed. One, the conquest is illegitimate. Two, all humanity is equal. Slavery is not a valid, is illegal. All forms of slavery, Native Americans and chattel slavery. And two, the criteria for waging a just war is very narrow. You have to be attacked. And so these are all very kind of, they're very kind of restrictive. So the British are paying close attention to what the Spanish are debating, And so, I mean, there's a great document from 1609, the Virginia Company, and this is basically the company that funds the settlement of Jamestown and then later Plymouth. And they're sitting around and they're saying, should we maybe issue a proclamation saying what we hope to do in the Americas? And then they have this debate, and they say, the Spanish have been debating this for a century, and they can't justify conquest and enslavement. Maybe it's better we don't say anything. It's such a perfect example of evasion and denial. Understanding that what you're doing is basically illegal and and unjustifiable. Not even in terms of Christian proselytizing. So that's one of the tensions in the book. How that kind of evasion reproduces itself. Through people like Thomas Jefferson. The thing is, when the United States achieves independence from Great Britain, it sees its predecessors, the settlers, the Puritans, as having done nothing wrong, right? The independence is the fulfillment of settlement. Spanish Americans look back at the conquest and they understood their break from Spain as an atonement, as an attempt to redeem or make good on the carnage that the conquistadors dealt out against Native Americans. They were much more aware and attuned to the tragedies of history and the sufferings of history and to the sufferings caused by the colonial state. So that tension, I think, runs through the present. I mean, you could say the United States remembers nothing, Latin America forgets, Latin America remembers everything, the United States remembers nothing, forgets everything.
But how does that, and that's well said, how does that inform, say, different concepts of rights in Latin America versus the United States? We have a lot of freedoms from things as opposed to freedom to or guarantees for things, right? I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really wonderful question, Emma, and that is another structuring tension throughout the book. We think of rights as either political or individual. The idea that a legitimate state is a state that restrains itself, and the U.S. Constitution is a kind of the purest expression of this. That that the state shall not. You create the greatest area of liberty possible for individual action, whether to speak, to assemble, to believe. Some say to own guns. Things are debatable. There's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that, except for one sentence that calls for the defense of the general welfare, that imagines the state as acting to create virtue or to create a common good. Latin Americans, the other concept of rights is social rights, the idea that the state needs to take action in order to create a general welfare, and take action to basically capture surplus wealth and redistribute it in the form of a social wage, in the form of education, in the form of, healthcare, in the form of pensions and whatnot. So, and most countries in the world have a balance between individual rights and social rights written into their constitutions. Latin America social rights were basically created in Latin America out of this complex that I've been talking about, this colonial Catholic complex. It's too complicated to explain right now, but I'll just say that the Mexican Constitution in 1917 was the first constitution that tried to balance social and individual rights, that said that it was a state's responsibility not just to restrain itself, but to actually take action. And defining citizenship not just as freedom to pursue one's interest, but as being guaranteed a living wage, guaranteed education, guaranteed healthcare, guaranteed the right to join a union. So those social rights, and Latin America is deeply committed to that vision of citizenship, so much so that even conservatives, normal conservatives, are okay with this, right? Like, right. During the Cold War, even when the worst of the anti-communist dictatorships were in place, they never wrote out of the constitutions. Even Chile and Pinochet didn't write out of the constitution the right to healthcare, the right to education. And so that tension runs through the book. And just to come back, the U.S. Constitution, the first Latin American Constitution, let me put it this way, was in Venezuela in 1812. It was a failed Republican state that was taken back by the Spanish very quickly, but they did write a constitution. The word social appears in that document 9 times, and the word society something like 13 times. Neither one of those words appear in the U.S. Constitution. There is no sense of social. And again, this goes back, as you said, to the conquest itself, because there was a sense that the conquistadores had broken free of society, and they were the ones that were acting like animals. They were the ones that were once they were kind of free from all social restraint, they were subhuman. And the constitutions of Latin America were very clear to say that there is no such thing as individualism without society. There is no such thing as humanity without society. They're mutually dependent. And that was there at the beginning of Spanish American independence.
And we now see how durable that is because of the threats that those more humanist institutions have posed to the United States in the 19th and 20th century, since we have you for a limited time, to fast forward to more modern times where people will understand, like, of course, the death squads and the United States overturning democratically elected left-wing leaders, and our policy towards Cuba, and even how that tradition is just dozens of miles off the shore of Florida, but not right here in the United States. Like, what problems did that present for American capitalist expansion in the Western Hemisphere, given, how resource-rich Latin America is, or I should say U.S. capitalist expansion, how resource-rich these areas are, and how the U.S. went to great lengths to try to undo these traditions.
Yeah, you can think of the great arc of the Mexican Revolution. The Mexican Revolution, the Constitution also allowed for agrarian distribution, land distribution, and nationalization of property. And Mexico nationalized the U.S. oil companies, and it distributed an enormous amount of land that was owned by U.S. landowners. And that was all based on the notion that this was the fulfillment of the social rights obligation of the state, of the revolutionary state. The Mexican Revolution was the first third world revolution against capitalism and its enabling myths. It legitimated nationalization. The reason why I'm saying this is because you asked about the challenges to U.S. capitalism. A lot of it comes out of Latin America. The migration of the notion of sovereignty from political sovereignty to economic sovereignty. sovereignty, that nations have a right to nationalize their resources. They have a right to nationalize their electric companies, even if it's owned by John Rockefeller. This all comes out of Latin America, and the pushback against that was a large part of the history of the 20th century. I also want to tell just one quick story about the contradictions between social and economic rights and how it plays out in the Western Hemisphere. Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. I don't know maybe it's called a Commonwealth. I can't keep up with what it's called.
It's a colony. It's a colony.
It's a colony of the United States, right? And so but it has this Latin American political culture. So in 1954, they draw up a constitution, a Commonwealth constitution that was going to be part of the U.S.'s, similar to state constitutions. And they had a couple of clauses in there about the right to health care and the right to education, as if they were Mexico or as if they were Cuba or something, right? So they pass on the Constitution for approval to the U.S. Congress because the Congress has to approve it. And they see these clauses, and the conservatives freak out about so here's social rights literally sneaking in through the back door of U.S.'s informal empire. Puerto Rico it was like 3 clauses that the Puerto Rican state provides, education and money for the poor and medical care. And the U.S. Congress forced Mexico to strike those clauses from its constitution before they approved it. So that's a perfect example of the tension that I'm talking about. I mean, I think the commitment to individual rights has become a religion in the United States, and it's the core that binds the different constituencies of the right together. I think there's a fetish of individualism, that individual rights that the right obviously is a wide spectrum and brings many groups together, but a certain commitment that we've got to keep out this notion of social rights and from the United States is deep. And I think it's what drives a lot of the anti-immigration stuff.
Lastly, can you expand on that, Greg? We'll let you go after this.
Because they're bringing with them conceptions of citizenship that entail the right to education.
But we let in all those Cuban immigrants. But sarcasm. Even the more right-wing ones. Yeah.
There's a lot of Cuban immigrants that are in Nevada organizing unions.
Yeah.
They may hate Fidel Castro and think, and the Cuban Revolution, but they still think that they have a right to a union. And they've been I have friends that organize in Nevada and Las Vegas and LA, and there's a bunch of Cuban migrants there that hate, they're totally anti-communist, but they're active in the union, and and give them a candidate that promises national health care, and they'll vote for him or her.
Well, we are praying for that as well. 2028 couldn't come fast enough, although I don't know, maybe if we're talking Josh Shapiro, then I'm going to be wishing for a different time. But we're hopeful here. Greg Grandin, everybody should check out America, New History of the New World.
Can I hold it up?
Oh my gosh, of course. Here you go. there it is. Visual.
It's a New York Times bestseller.
Yes, it
is. It
was
compared to Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Well, perhaps another Pulitzer is in your future. Greg Grandin, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Of course. You too. All right, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by our second guest, Brian Merchant, about AI and how it is already taking our jobs. We are back, and we are joined now by Brian Merchant, technology reporter in residence at the AI Now Institute, publisher of the newsletter Blood in the Machine. It's also the title of his 2023 book. Previously, the technology columnist for the LA Times and senior editor at Motherboard back then. Brian, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So you wrote a piece for your Substack, as I mentioned. It's called Blood in the Machine. It's called The AI Jobs Crisis is Here Now. So why were you compelled to write and indicate that the AI jobs crisis is already here, that people have been warning about for a while? And what is its impact looking like in the present?
Yeah, well, I kind of wanted to dive into that question, right? Like, I mean, it's always put in the future tense. Like, what will AI mean for jobs? What is going to happen? How it's sort of positioned as this unknowable thing. But over the last 2 years, I have been sort of reporting on and talking to people who are dealing with sort of this frontline impact. And even though it's not necessarily sort of being tracked on like a macroeconomic level, we need more good data on this. I've had enough sort of anecdata. I've done enough investigative work. I've talked to so many workers who are impacted by this stuff that I decided I just needed to start putting this all together and to formulate a theory of what is happening now. And sort of the most recent catalyst was the fact that I'm sure folks maybe saw in the news that Duolingo had announced that it was going to be, again, like in the future, it was going to be an AI first, company, and that they're going to start phasing out contractors and writers and translators. And I soon heard from actual writers and say, there's nothing future tense about this. They've already let us all go. All of the writers and translators, people who sort of have made Duolingo in this quirky language learning app into a success, and that's what people love about it, we're gone. Like, they fired us 6 months ago or a year ago, and now they're replacing what we used to do with AI. And I've heard stories like this in the video game industry, in illustration, in the animation industry, and so it's enough to say, look, the AI companies are providing other corporations with this logic, this idea that they can automate or replace their workers. Whether or not the technology is ready or it actually can replace the workers, sometimes it doesn't matter. They can just take that logic and then say, well, this is what we wanted to do anyways. We wanted to get rid of you, or maybe this is a useful way for us to say, all you pesky workers who may be asking for raises or better conditions, well, we can replace you if we want to yet, so don't get too, aggressive or demanding for better conditions. And I think the best example of the way that this is manifesting is just looking at what's happened with Doge, right? How are they justifying, a lot of this work when they go into a new agency like the General Services Administration, or now even, just about everywhere, but that started with the GSA, and they said, we're going to do an AI first strategy right now, and that is not necessarily true. So for this piece that I also spoke to an 18F worker who was one of the technological services department workers who was let go when the Elon Musk and Doge completely wiped out that entire agency, and said, this is part of our AI first strategy. And he saw the AI tools that they're actually planning on using in the agency. And he's like, and it was laughable, he said. There's no way that this thing is ready for the prime
the
time.
Technology's not there. But so the Republicans right now are debating their budget bill, and currently they're proposing this part of the budget bill, which is just thrown in there clearly by these special interests, that says, so much for states' rights. The Republicans want to use the federal government to block states in the United States, even if they have state law, from regulating AI for 10 years. And what's so crazy about what you're describing is Duolingo is firing these people with this like AI that's not, the technology isn't there, but what is there is built on from culling from the work of human beings prior to this.
100%. I mean, and that's what, and we're good. So people often say, well, which is it? Is, AI, so scary that it's going to replace us all and we need to prepare for that? Or does it suck and is something that we shouldn't worry about? But the answer is it can be both, and it is both, because it is being used as the tool to do these things, as an excuse to do these things, and it can do immense damage in the short term. You look at a company like Klarna, which is this fintech company, this Swedish company that was like one of the first major companies to like go all in on AI and like really be a cheerleader, so much so that OpenAI is using like quotes and testimonials on its own webpage.
And I think Klarna just did a deal with DoorDash so that you can do installment payments for your lunch, which is going to just completely, we just hit a record credit card debt a few months ago, just to give people a sense of how people are getting by just putting it on their cards right now.
Putting it on their cards, breaking down sort of, all of these structures and these jobs, right? Like DoorDash is the model that kind of predates AI. So it's useful to bring that into the conversation, I think, because if you want to look at what OpenAI and the AI companies are doing, it's like what Uber did on steroids, right? Arguing that, that it needs special treatment, that it should get rid of regulations that govern, say, taxi work in cities. But now these AI companies are going right to the source. They're saying, you know what? We've mustered enough power. We've got enough buddies in Congress. And the thing about this moment is it's not just special interest. It's actually the oligarchic capture of Congress and the federal sort of level. The Trump administration itself is now run by people who have a vested interest in seeing AI companies take root. So we have this concentration of power, and they're saying, why don't we just go to Congress and see if we can ban all lawmaking at the state level? This is the party that just last summer was like championing states' rights, and now they're saying we're going to ban your ability to legislate on this hugely impactful technology at all. And they're sliding it into a budget reconciliation bill. And I've never seen anything like this, right? Again, it's like Uber on steroids. Like this technology is too important. It's so game changing. We can't have anything getting in the way. And just the fact that this might even pass I think is just yet another one of these reflections of this moment and how much power sort of, the tech industry wields in this administration and this Republican Congress.
And I wonder if that crypto money, the record amount of crypto money that came into the 2024 election, is also just AI money. I mean, these are the same players. There's the same people. They're all getting rich off of AI and crypto.
Yeah. Mark Andreessen, who is one of the biggest sort of, crypto investors through Andreessen Horowitz, the venture capital firm, is also huge into AI. Every single VC is big into AI now, and his fingerprints are all over this new law. There's a strong argument to be made that Andreessen now is just as influential as Musk is in the Trump administration and in the GOP, and he has this little tech manifesto that came out last year that sort of is the framework for arguing that, regulations should be done away with, except for some very basic things. And you can see that in when like JD Vance goes to Paris and he makes this blustery speech about how American AI is going to dominate. And then now we see it in this bill that's justifying, trying to wipe away even the capacity for states to write laws that pertain to AI.
Well, Mark Andreessen, it's funny you mentioned that. I guess it was last week. He was saying how there's one job that's too important for AI to take. Brian, you must have seen this quote. Why don't you tell the audience what that was?
Oh, three guesses. Yeah, and the first two don't count. I mean, what is the one job? It's the venture capitalist.
Venture capitalists. I mean, look, we have nuclear scientists, we have people trying to cure disease, and they can all be replaced by artificial intelligence.
Can I just say, if venture capitalists can't be replaced by it, then neither can roulette player.
Yeah.
Well, I think that they've actually done studies on this that just sort of did actually pit sort of, I don't know if it was a VC, but an investment banker, against sort of just like an automated system. And like the automated systems, like they win, they make more money. But of course, that's immaterial, right? Who gets automated and who doesn't is all a question of power and very little else.
Right. Let's pull up this graph you cite in your piece, and it's pulling from Derek Thompson's writing in The Atlantic. Here's this graph. I guess this one must be from The Atlantic here, where you can see the unemployment for recent college graduates. Take a look at that. Obviously, the COVID pandemic is a huge driver of that going below zero at this point, but we're in a worse situation in 2025.
Can you describe for the audio folks what we're seeing here too?
Yeah, actually, Brian, maybe you can, as somebody who's maybe more number literate than me, math literate, graph literate.
Yeah, so this graph points out a really disconcerting trend for one major reason, and that's historically recent college grads, like people who just graduate from college with a new degree, eager to enter the workforce, are typically among the most employable demographic, period, right? They're young, they're ambitious, they're educated, they're willing to work for relatively cheap. So they are sort of an ideal worker in a lot of cases. Firms want to invest in them, but this number shows that number is declining. And it's declining relative to the employment in the economy at large, which is really interesting and disconcerting, right? You'd expect, okay, maybe the job market itself is tanking, and then you would find fewer college grads able to get work. But while the economy has been relatively healthy by these metrics, anyways, by these metrics, there's a strong case to be made that it's not as healthy as. But anyways. It's not, in other words, this number is going down not in tandem with the regular numbers. And so this could mean a number of things, but one plausible theory is that firms aren't just hiring as much anymore. They're giving those jobs to AI, to automated systems, because a lot of times the work that a college student or a college grad would do is sort of the entry level work. They may be ambitious, they may be smart, but when they come into a firm, they do sort of, the easier, less complicated tasks. And that's the kind of stuff that you would expect to be done by AI, or that management thinks can be done by AI. And this is just worrying on so many levels. If new grads aren't entering the workforce and learning these skills and sort of growing with in their skill sets and in their knowledge bases, and instead it's just being handed over to AI, or the firms think they can hand it over to AI, then we risk sort of a pandemic-like condition where you have a group of people who just can't find employment, and all of the attendant social issues that go along with that. So yeah, this is, and I'll also note that some people have pointed out that this extends before the ChatGPT AI boom, but firms have been talking about AI and automation for at least the last 10 years. And the other trend that's been really big in the same time period has been Uberization and gig work. And a lot of college students have had to get contract work and stuff that's also less likely to show up in economic data.
I got an internship out of college, and, a lot of just regular jobs didn't bite. If I couldn't live at home and not pay rent while I was working, I don't know what I would have done. And that was back when I graduated in 2016. Yeah. But that is like, you hear about this all the time, and you wonder why there's like this. Honestly, that demographic went more for Trump than typical. I mean, Kamala Harris won young people, really young people, by I think 4 points or something like that. But it wasn't 6 points. I don't remember the exact polling, but it was not the typical shift you would see. I mean, with young people voting Democrat or numbers, margins, whatever.
Yeah. No, It's a worrying moment, and I think if this trend continues for another couple years, we'll be able to see again. Like, there's a lot of questions with AI. In one of the biggest questions is like long term. Like, can the firms keep this up? Like, can they keep shoveling sort of the kind of work that a college grad would do into an AI system, or are they going to regret doing that in 2 years? So I think we're at this incredibly precarious moment. And like I said earlier, it can do a ton of damage if companies just decide to sort of downsize, decide to lay people off. And it's going to do damage in particular to those areas and those parts of the economy that are sort of, more vulnerable to AI, that have jobs that even if it, if their work isn't as well replicated or isn't as good when it's done by the AI, that maybe companies can just justify it in the long term. And these are some of the most important parts of our culture, right? Artists, illustrators, writers, designers, journalists. AI can, in a lot of cases, produce a facsimile of the work that's done by these people, enough to maybe, just get a manager to sign off on it, or to get used to some lower standards, or maybe they decide that consumers, don't need the human-made stuff as much, and that's what I think is really dangerous about this moment. It's a great sort of dulling down and sort of, just slopification of not just like the internet, but also industry after industry.
Well, you mentioned Doge earlier, and I think it's not irrelevant that those efforts by Elon Musk and the Groypers that he hired, and Trump, like, they were firing people.
Yeah.
And they were using AI to do it.
Yeah.
And this is between the tariffs and the recession it may cause, and Doge trying to explicitly funnel people back into the private sector, or at least unemploy people, and then using AI to do it as companies lay off people with AI. I mean, it feels like this is some labor discipline that is connecting all of these interests, from the Republican administration to the tech overlords that have backed it full-throatedly.
Yeah, 100%. That is the through line. And it extends directly to what we're seeing happen this week. Because take a closer look, and that's what I've done this week. I've been talking to people who've been involved in writing some of these AI bills in California that are now threatened by this ban. I talked to Assemblyman Isaac Bryan, who has a couple of the bills. And look at what these bills are doing. They're not even crazy bills, right? They prevent abuses of AI systems in the workplace, primarily, right? They say, if you're going to use an AI system to like do hiring and firing, then you have to let people know. You have to put certain measures in place so it doesn't discriminate. Another bill focuses on workplace surveillance and says you have to notify workers if you're going to use an AI system that ingests their data. So these aren't even really like crazy, like no AI bills. These are bills that just seek, like, I would call them common sense sort of interventions in how an AI can be used. But the AI companies are looking at this and saying, oh, this is gonna, gonna like cost us a little bit of money if we have to make tools that can help people comply with this. And B, it cuts into the, primary value proposition of these tools, which, as you just said, is if not automating labor or automating jobs outright, then providing new tools for management, for labor discipline and control. And anything that cuts into that is not tolerable to OpenAI and to Google and to the companies that are selling what it essentially amounts to automation software. And so they're looking at these bills going, okay, these costs could add up fast. Maybe we can just go right to Congress. We've got our buddies in there, and maybe we can just make the case that we can just block them wholesale, which is, again, crazy. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it's just, it's when you talk about Uber, it's the same thing. It's just on steroids here, because the Obama administration was pretty pro gig. I mean, that's the bipartisan thing here, which is like, the Obama administration empowered these people with a lot of subsidies, Tesla, but also like, Mark Zuckerberg and all of it. And now they're here, and this is the monster they've created. And this happens, it feels like, with every industry. Then they just shift to the party that's explicitly pro-capital, and they get what they want, it looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even beyond that, Obama sort of empowered them ideologically as well, right? He helped them create this aura that they're building the future, that Airbnb and, Facebook at the time are somehow inherently progressive because they're tech companies, because Google had a tagline that said, don't be evil. And they did help. And by cozying up, that was a symbiotic relationship. Obama,
and they did it with Starbucks as well, who just tried to fire a bunch of people with AI. But anyway,
it is a through line, right? Like the Obama White House had a compelling antitrust case against Google 10 years ago, and it declined to take it up. The same thing, it sort of let Uber and Amazon and the other tech companies grow in power and kind of turned a blind eye because it was, again, it was good for both parties at the time. And now we have a new, heavily monopolized or duopolized industry that is dominated by some extremely powerful players, and it's extremely difficult now to unwind this. And now they quite literally, want to have this power to again, as you said, one up Uber. They want to take it to the next level. OpenAI's charter, and this is really important to understand, that what they describe AGI as the way that they're chasing, and there's all this, is this AGI? Is this not? Is AGI? What even is AGI? Well, OpenAI has a very specific way of defining that. And that is basically as providing a system that can do the work that humans do for most economically valuable work. So that's their pitch to investors, to backers, to partners, that we are building a tool that can replace most humans and do most economically valuable work. When we get there, that's how you'll know that we've hit it big. And this is our pitch to you. Hitch your wagon to this ride, and we will give you a tool that can replace humans. Like, this is the end goal. Again, open question if they'll ever get there, but that is explicitly what they're trying to do.
Brian Merchant, technology reporter at the AI Now Institute, publisher of the newsletter Blood in the Machine. It's also the name of his book, but you can check out his Substack at Blood in the Machine. I'm not sure about the link, but we'll put that below wherever people are listening to or watching this. Brian, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And if you have a story about how AI has hit your job, I'm currently collecting these. I've already heard from over 50 people with great testimonials. Please, just send them through my newsletter. It's an ongoing project. And thanks so much, Emma.
Of course. I mean, before we let you go, here we have some people writing in. SoCal Ryan, my friend, is a social worker and therapist, and her employer wants to record sessions so they can use them to train AI to replace her as a counselor. As if there's a simple formula to the human soul and our needs. Pardon my French, but F that. Well, we'll save it for the fun half with the cursing, but here it is. Mr. Melancholy, data entry employee here. My leadership openly brags to us about how AI will make us obsolete, always expecting to be fired. We're going to get many more stories, so send it to Brian.
Send it to me. Just 2 weeks ago, I went to a strike where therapists were on a hunger strike in LA in 2025 because their work is being automated like an assembly line, they said. So this is happening, and we need to understand it, and we need to fight back against it.
Where they're starting, the therapy is supposed to be about human connection, and this is one of the frontiers. I mean, that is like... Yeah, we're talking dystopian novels here, of course, but not in the take over the world way, the like you have no human connection way.
No, I mean, some of the groups that are fighting hardest against this is where you can see the real I mean, a lot of teachers are standing up against the use of AI in classrooms, nurses who are being forced by hospitals to use AI to diagnose their patients, and it becomes a real life or death struggle sometimes to have to override this system in a heated moment to get patients the care and medicine they need, and that hospitals are saying you have to use AI first. So you can see sort of some of the battle lines being drawn and people really pushing back, and it's only going to get more heated before anything gets better.
Brian Merchant, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, with that, folks, we're going to wrap up the free part of this show and head into the fun half of this show where we will read your IMs, take your calls. We will be joined by Brandon Sutton and by Matt Binder. As we have Brandon, as we're setting that up, I'll read some IMs. Whoa. Hello. He's not in the shot yet. Okay, one sec. Punch Drunk Pulpit. I'm an illustrator and graphic designer. My wife is a color artist in animation. AI has destroyed so much of our industries and options for the future. I mean, like, I'm not sure if you're in a union, Punch Drunk Pulpit, but like, what was secured with the actor strike and the writer strike?
Not enough, probably.
Not enough, probably. Yeah.
And it's worth pointing out like how they're doing this, which is with the sort of simulated or like sort of digested and then regurgitated work of the history of these industries, whether it's illustrators or musicians. There's a Marx quote where it says capital is dead labor that sort of works vampire-like on the existing society. And I mean, that's really what this is. It's like capitalists have discovered a way to reanimate, workers gone by and pit them against people who are alive now.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning? Oh, okay. One sec. I'll ask Brandon first. Hello, Brandon.
Hello.
Did you get a new camera? It looks like very crisp today.
No, I have no control over how my camera looks on any given day. It seems random, but I should get a new camera. I think I'm going to do that. I'll get a new camera.
Right.
I mean, today it looks fine.
It looks great. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Fair enough. What's happening on your shows?
Well, I mean, every day. Well, not every day. That's a lie. But some days we're streaming. We'll be streaming tomorrow after the Majority Report, a little show you may never have heard of. And I know I don't have anything special planned, but I think we'll have a good time no matter what. It's Friday. We'll chop it up. We'll keep it casual. We'll find out about fallen angels. We'll find out about Bigfoot. We'll find out how they're related.
That's the pitch. All right, check out the discourse. Hello, Matt Binder. We can't hear you.
Muted, Binder.
Muted.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing well. What is going on your shows?
Sure. So on Doomed last night at youtube.com/MattBinder, I talked about how Grok, Elon Musk's AI chatbot, went insane, obsessing over South African far right-wing talking points about non-existent white genocide. It was very interesting to see Grok yesterday. And the show was very fun yesterday because this was so ridiculous. youtube.com/MattBinder.
Check that out. Matt Leck, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Yeah, Andrew Hartman on talking about his excellent book that should be relevant to a lot of people listening to this. Karl Marx in America, a really good overview of the history of that guy's ideas. Stateside here. Also Michael Burns, philosopher, talking about whether we are less philosophical than we were when maybe I graduated college. And talking about the crisis of masculinity and the religious turn we're seeing from people like Russell Brand and Charlie Kirk. Not that it's new with Charlie, but it's just kind of like, he tried to present himself as a logic lord, and now he's saying, I felt God in Israel, so now I support it. Like, okay, I guess I'll try to logic that. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get access to that.
All right, guys, we will head into the fun half. See you there.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the Majority Report.
Wait, look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please.
No, I'm gonna pause you right there. Wait, what? You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. So was offered to tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. So was offered to tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. What? Tour, sushi, and poker biz. Twerk, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Twerk, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Look at how sad he's become now. You shouldn't even talk about it. I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Twerk, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Oh my God.
Twerk,
wow.
Sushi.
I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind.
So was offered to twerk, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Logic.
Twerk, sushi, and poker with the boys. Boy, twerk.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid.
Twerk.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid.
Had this debate 7,000 times.
A little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid.
Twerk. I'm losing my fucking mind.
Some people just don't understand.
So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but like, I absolutely think the U.S. should be providing me with a wife and kids.
That's not what we're talking about here.
Okay, all right. It's not a fun job.
Twerk.
That's a real thing. That's a real thing. Real thing.
Willy Wonka. Twerk.